Welcome everyone to the third episode of Analyzing Evil. The villain we'll be going over in this video isn't your traditional run-of-the-mill evildoer. No, this one doesn't kill, torture, or brutalize anybody. At least not physically. This villain is simply just doing her job. Or is she? As you've already seen from the title card, this video is going to be all about the psychological terror that is Nurse Mildred Ratched. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is often ranked as one of the greatest films ever made, and for good reason. It's a brilliant look into the inner workings of mental institutions as they were in the mid-20th century, and a great insight on the terrible effect that bureaucratic power has on those who wield it, and those they wield it against. With every great film comes great characters, and within that roster of characters we can usually find for ourselves an equally great villain. This is the case for Nurse Ratched, who more often than not you can find listed near the top of any list of great villains. There had never been a villain quite like her at the time, and there hasn't really been one since. This owes itself not only to the great writing for the character, but the performance of Louise Fletcher, who brings her to life better than anyone could have. Her facial expressions and mannerisms are a big part of what makes this character an amazing villain. We'll be delving into the mind of Nurse Ratched, and we'll also be paying close attention to how she acts and the way she speaks. Her dialogue itself is important, but the personality that's shown through her dialogue isn't so much built upon what she says, but rather how she says it. We're going to explore all of the things that make this lovely lady tick, and decompress everything that's inside that cruel and vindictive mind of hers. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I present to you the dreaded Nurse Ratched. In our first encounter with Nurse Ratched, it seems innocent enough at first. She's leading a meeting where the group attempts to work out their individual problems by sharing them and gaining insight on them through the input of other members of the group. In practice, this is in fact an effective form of group therapy. We see her open up by bringing forth the problem Harding has with his wife that he brought up in their last session, and asking for the opinions of the other members on the matter. Now, it's natural for people who are in these groups to feel a bit timid about sharing, especially being the first to do so. The way the other characters in the film react to having their names called by Nurse Ratched could be seen as simple shyness, or a result of whatever mental afflictions they suffer from. But in this case, I feel it's a great way to establish something that is central to her character: fear. The way most of them recoil at the thought of being the first to share is, as I said before, something natural for most people. But here, this is our first exposure to how the characters feel about Nurse Ratched. They fear her, and perhaps I'm reaching here, but I don't feel that any of them feel even remotely comfortable about baring themselves openly to Nurse Ratched, save for Harding at this point. A cold glare is shared between Nurse Ratched and Mac, giving us another important feature of hers right off the bat: her very distinctive and bone-chilling stare. This stare is seen once again in the following scene when the boys are out playing basketball. Staring down from the window in disapproval, emotionless as ever, Ratched sees something in Mac that she can't stand: chaos. A wrench in the machine that'll throw her orderly world into disorder. I can only speculate that this was what was on her mind when she was staring out that window, and you can't blame her on that account, as you'll see more and more of Mac's rebellious nature as the film goes on. Our next encounter with Ratched is during her exchange with Mac on the volume of the record player. Here we get to see for the first time another key to her personality and methods. In this exchange, we see Ratched explain to Mac why he can't be in the nurse's station, and why she can't turn down the music, just as she would explain something to a child. The method she uses to explain the volume of the record player to Mac is used many times throughout the film. She tells him that the rest of the patients wouldn't like it if she turned the music down. Makes sense, right? But the reality is, she's using the patients as a foil to keep things the way she likes them. This is her main way of getting what she wants, using the patients as an excuse to keep things in order just as she likes them. Remember this, because it comes into play many times in this film. This, coupled with her condescending tone, is her way of demeaning and dehumanizing her patients to make them feel lower than her, and of less intelligence, causing them to be further intimidated by her as a result. Another key thing we see on display here is the way she smiles, and when she does so. There isn't so much as a crack in her features when she's explaining things to Mac. The only time she can be seen showing any sort of pleasure is when she gets her way, or when making a threat, such as when Mac takes his medicine, stating that if he doesn't want to take it orally, he can take it another way, suggesting, of course, that he do so rectally. Once again, as if she were dealing with a child, she tells him, "Very good," in a very patronizing tone. Sometime later on, we find ourselves witnessing another of her meetings. This, above all else, seems to be the way she keeps her tight grip on the patients and holds them exactly where she wants them to be, in a constant state of fear and anxiety. Mac goes on to suggest that they change the schedule around so the boys will be able to watch the opening of the World Series. How horrifying, Ratched must have thought in this moment. To change the schedule would be to change how things are ordered, how she's ordered them. And there's no way someone like her could ever have a change like that made. Unless it was her doing the changing, of course. Once again, she goes on to explain that the patients wouldn't like this, because after all, it takes them a long while to adjust to any type of schedule, let alone a change to one that's already set. The point here is to show even further that this is how she gets what she wants. Half of these patients aren't even lucid. Some of them wouldn't even flinch if you shaved off all the hair on their heads, let alone flip over a little change to the schedule. She puts a very nice touch on the decision-making here as well. She allows Mac to put it to a vote, which seems great, right? She's not so bad after all. I mean, she's just looking out for her patients and wants to decide things in a fair manner. Right? No. That couldn't be further from the truth. Ratched here knows full well that few, if any of the patients, at this point at least, are going to do anything that isn't according to her will. They fear her so much, and the potential repercussions that could follow, that most of them look around sheepishly, betraying their own desires at the behest of their preeminent master. Further playing the part, she even apologizes to him once the vote doesn't come out to a majority, once again shifting the blame from herself onto others. The next day, in another meeting, we see her trying to force Billy into talking about some very sensitive and traumatic events in his life. A girl who he loved and asked to marry him, and then his subsequent attempt to commit suicide upon her rejection of his proposal. Cheswick interrupts her and asks why she keeps pressing him if he doesn't want to talk, and asks her what's the purpose of it. She responds by telling him, matter-of-factly, that the purpose of the meeting is therapy. While this might be true, I believe she does so in order to torment young Billy. There's therapy in forcing someone to confront a truth they're fearful of, but in this case, while not very apparent by her mood, which is fairly ironclad throughout most of her exchanges, upon taking a closer look at the way she presses him, you can see that there's no therapy in this. Only a terrifying revisitation of painful memories. Here, Cheswick also brings up the matter of the second game of the ongoing World Series, a game he'd like to watch, thus once again giving Mac an in to request another vote on the matter. Here we get to see two things. The first is Mac's erosion of the fear that hangs over the head of these men, as now they all hold their hands up when asked to vote, showing a bit of their braver side now that they have a charismatic source of inspiration. And two, that Nurse Ratched won't be outdone by anything, especially defiance. She uses a very powerful tool that she holds in her repertoire, the use of semantics. While yes, the members present in the meeting overwhelmingly voted for a change in the schedule to watch the World Series, she states that technically there are 18 members on the ward, and well, it just wouldn't be fair if we didn't have a majority vote on the matter, now would it? There's always a way to get her way as far as she is concerned. She provides Mac with another way to satisfy his desires. After all, he needs only one vote. Should be easy, right? Well, no. The rest of the patients aren't in the meeting for a reason, and Ratched knows this. They're incapable of having the same kind of interactions with others due to their various delusions and illnesses. Knowing this, Ratched adjourns the meeting, and once again, attempting to show herself as the fair and just nurse of the flock, states that Mac can bring the matter up again in their meeting tomorrow. The thing about Ratched that you have to keep in mind is something that the director, writer, and actor do very well with the character. Unless you're looking for it, it's not very apparent that this character is evil at all. I mean, she's just doing her job, right? She's not being cruel about it. She's giving the man a chance, after all. But once you take into account her inherent need for control, do you realize the satisfaction that is hidden behind her vacant visage. Her desire for control permeates her entire persona, and becomes more and more evident as time goes on. After trying with everyone, Mac finally gets the vote that he needs. The chief raises his hand. He's won. Ratched will surely honor her word. Right? Wrong. Once again, she uses her bread and butter. Semantics. The meeting's been adjourned. The vote was 9-9 at the close of the session, and therefore the chief's vote is invalid. Not only does she get her way, but she gains an even higher amount of satisfaction in the fact that she has caused anger and sadness to another person. Without so much as flinching, she explains this to Mac, causing him to lash out in anger. As he turns around, she closes the window to her station, and you can just make out a smile forming at the corners of her mouth. She then turns around, puts on the record player, and stands with her hand on her hip as she stares at Mac. Her body language is key in understanding her feelings and her thoughts. Here she looks over to him as if to say, "Well, what are you going to do about it?" Well, Mac in fact does do something about it. He narrates an imaginary game for the boys, exciting them and making them laugh and holler, and generally enjoy themselves. But this isn't joy. No. To Nurse Ratched, this is disorder, chaos. Joy is what she believes joy is, not you. She gives the men a deadly stare, before we get to hear her for the first time break her calm and cool demeanor by loudly shouting at them to stop immediately. This is the first time we get to bear witness to Ratched's last resort method for dealing with defiance. When she doesn't get her way, when someone isn't acting according to plan, her calm, cool, collected demeanor and her roundabout way of controlling her patients through semantics and wordplay devolves into commands, a raised voice, and a menacing, cold tone. In the next scene, when McMurphy is asked about whether he likes it at the asylum, he complains about Nurse Ratched. When the doctor hears this, he says to him that she's one of the finest nurses in the institution. This is further expanded on in the next scene that our lovely nurse appears in, wherein she is included in a meeting of the various doctors of the asylum to give her opinion on whether or not they should release McMurphy or keep him on for further study. The recognition she receives could explain a lot about her behavior. If she's perceived as one of the finest nurses the institution has to offer, that must validate to her that she is doing a good job. If she's doing a good job, her methods, at least in her mind, must be correct. This scene, however, reveals something deeper about the mind of Nurse Ratched. Here we see without a doubt that she is an incredibly vindictive person. Here she has a chance to get rid of arguably her biggest problem, the wrench in the machine that's been causing her trouble, that's been disrupting the natural order, can be carted off somewhere else where he has no effect on her. She must know that he isn't mentally ill. It's never mentioned by her, but given the interactions and opinions of the other characters in the film regarding McMurphy's sanity, there's no way she believes he's insane. So what's her reason for keeping him there then? The only reason she needs: revenge. A person like Nurse Ratched isn't satisfied with throwing her problems somewhere else for somebody else to take care of. Why, she can take care of it herself. And by taking care of it herself, she can also witness the torment of her problem with her own eyes, which surely brings her great satisfaction. We see a bit of this in a later scene in another meeting. Here she uses her condescending tone, smiling tightly and talking to Mac once again as if she were speaking to a child. This scene sees the deterioration of Ratched's composure even further than we had seen during the fantasy ball game. Once confronted with challenges, her face somehow becomes even more menacing, her gaze deadlier, and her aura much more cold. Through an even tighter frown, when Cheswick begins his outburst, she demands that he sit down, raising her voice at him and becoming visibly angrier at the ongoing commotion that now surrounds her. The calm, composed, well-to-do nurse is suddenly made into a rage-filled mess. She can't help it, though. As much as she'd like to keep her image intact, a person's true self tends to show itself in these moments of vulnerability. Back to her old self in the next meeting, Ratched has regained her composure. But upon Mac's return, we do get to see some discomfort through her facial expressions when he plays his little gag on the boys. Ever the stoic, or so she'd like you to believe, Nurse Ratched carries on dutifully with her work. Now, the scene that takes place the day after the Christmas party is the most pivotal scene in the entire movie in a number of ways, but especially so in providing us with a perfect image of Ratched. She comes into work as normal the morning after, though today something is noticeably wrong. She picks up her pace as she walks in. The frown that always graces her face has somehow moved even further downward. However, she keeps calm. But through her subordinates, we get a glimpse of the unempathetic monster that she is on the inside. Rather than going around and waking up the sleeping patients gently, they're roughly and rudely roused from their slumber. Now, this might be a good way to treat a bunch of frat boys who just had a massive party, but these are sick men. Sick men who should be treated with much more care. She behaves more akin to a strict teacher overseeing a classroom of unruly boys, and the men who work under her act like police officers rather than caretakers. These next several minutes in the film are where we see the true extent of her cruel and cold heart. Billy, after enjoying himself, after feeling good about himself, confronts Miss Ratched after his excursion. Here, I think it's important to note that at this moment, his stutter is virtually non-existent. Confident and full of joy, he manages to keep his condition under control, but it only takes a few words from the nurse to place him right back where he started. "You know, Billy, what worries me is how your mother is going to take this." Right there. She knows her patients. She knows how to exploit them and knows what triggers them. Without so much as a wrinkle moved on her face, she drops this bomb upon Billy. He begs and pleads for her not to tell his mother, but to no avail. He's dragged away, all the while screaming at her, losing all of his senses, in pure pain, and she looks on once again without any ounce of emotion behind her eyes. She shares a glance with McMurphy, as if to say, "Look what you've done to him." But no, while McMurphy undoubtedly broke her rules, and likely the rules of any hospital for that matter, Ratched is the one responsible for this lapse in Billy. Then, of course, we reach the most important scene of the entire movie. The death of Billy Bibbit. Distraught and seeing no way out, Billy chooses to end his life. Upon exiting the room after examining Billy, Nurse Ratched forces everyone away and says something only a deluded mind could possibly conceive of as right. She tells the men of the ward, "Now calm down. The best thing we can do is go on with our daily routine." Is that what we do, Nurse Ratched? When presented with the death of a friend, of a fellow patient, a comrade for these men, they should just simply forget and go along with the schedule as planned? The sheer insanity of this statement alone is enough to seal her fate as a cold-hearted villain. Promptly, she is strangled by Mac. Rightly so, perhaps. After this event, Mac is lobotomized. Whether this is her doing or not is unclear, as the hospital board could have made this decision. But she surely wouldn't have objected if she were presented with this option. In the end, she wins in a sense. In the film, she still retains her speech. And after all that's happened, it seems that one thing has remained constant on the ward: business as usual. Now that we've gathered all this information about her, the pressing question is, who exactly is Nurse Ratched? We're presented with a woman so caught up in her delusional way of patient care that she causes psychological pain and torment to all the patients she's charged with treating, which, when dealing with mentally ill patients, is especially detrimental and cruel. Cold-hearted and lacking empathy, this is a narcissistic and sadistic person whose only goal appears to be the validation of her worldview, and the strict and orderly execution of a negligent bureaucracy who sees her as a good example of a nurse, rather than the quite terrible one she actually is. Her ridiculous rules set forth for the ward causes a hindrance to her patient's recovery, rather than helping it, moving them further and further away from rehabilitation. Not even the death of a patient so young, who she was particularly close to, being friends with his mother after all, can move her from the dark corner she's conditioned her mind to inhabit, seeking comfort in the world she has created for herself. This is Nurse Ratched, a character that leaves us nothing to envy and much to despise. To put it simply, well, I think I'll turn it over to McMurphy for that one.
She ain't honest.
Oh, now look, Miss Ratched's one of the finest nurses we've got in this institution.
Well, I don't want to break up the meeting or nothing, but she's something of a cunt, ain't she, Doc?
And so ends our excursion into the mad mind of Nurse Ratched. As always, if you have any feedback, I'd love to hear it. Leave a comment down below with anything I missed or could improve on, and feel free to mention the name of one of your favorite villains that I may feature in an upcoming video. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll be seeing you soon.